My bosses framed me, then fired me, and I took nuclear retaliation. I caused a divorce, a prison sentence, and a few deportations. Before we begin, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and enabled notifications. Ring the bell. This is a long story, but if you stick with it until the end, you will learn how I was framed and fired from my job, accidentally triggering a chain reaction that resulted in a staff overhaul with several managers being fired or moved to other restaurants, the general manager being fired and divorcing, one of the managers being investigated by the FBI and eventually arrested, and several workers being deported. Here we go. I used to work at an elite restaurant operated by a major corporation that owns a number of restaurant brands. I worked there for about 3.5 years until being dismissed. More on that later. First, I'd want to explain my function there. My responsibilities at that work included a variety of tasks. Since the first day I started working there, I've made it my mission to learn everything I could. I was quite persistent with management when it came to learning a new department. I started as a server and worked my way up through several departments and job titles, including carryout, hosting, bartending, barbacking, banquets, catering, and deliveries. My primary purpose while working there was to be available for as many hours as possible. I was paid around $12 per hour, though this changed depending on whether I was working as a bartender or server and earning tips. Management eventually discovered that I was most suited for one of the non-tipped positions. I was so excellent at it that they decided to try me out as an unofficial supervisor over the team that handled carryout, catering, and delivery, which were all part of the same department. I knew this would mean a few fewer hours because I would only be working in one department. So I negotiated with my boss to raise my pay by $1.50 per hour. Because I was taking on more tasks, they were pleased with the wage boost. I wasn't attempting to obtain as much money as possible. All I wanted was to be able to pay my bills and have some money left over for enjoyment. I was living in the highly taxed city of Chicago, which is already in the highly taxed state of Illinois. So it was challenging to make ends meet while still having enough money to enjoy life. I'm a person who values simple pleasures and can appreciate them for extended periods of time. So it didn't take much money to make me happy. A video game may keep my interest for months or even years. I brought a family pet with me to Chicago, so that was an additional price. I found a girlfriend shortly after starting this role as the unofficial supervisor, so I was out frequently and spent money on her. With my employment and careful budgeting, I was able to buy everything. The money wasn't an issue. But because management had a high turnover rate, incoming managers sometimes had no idea what the department involved or how essential these departments' hours were to their employees. Eventually, it was announced that our present general manager would be sacked and replaced. The incoming general manager was expected to be a restaurant improvement superstar. We looked up his name and discovered him as the first search result on Google. But the entry was not a positive evaluation of his work ethic or his flawless ability to change the way a restaurant operates. It was actually a mugshot with a police report for recurrent domestic abuse. This is crucial later. We will call him Harvey. Shortly after Harvey started making adjustments, one of our best managers resigned. She refused to work with him and, like an oracle, warned us to expect a lot of harassment, misogynistic comments, and that he would eventually run this firm into the ground. Shortly after she left, our general manager began replacing our present managers with hand-picked people he had previously worked with. Eventually, all but one of the managers were replaced. That manager was the kitchen manager. We will call him Frito. Frito had been there since I began working there. He appeared to be a chameleon, since his principles and ethics seemed to shift depending on who his supervisor was. To be honest, I admire his survival instincts, but in the end, I regard him as a suck-up and traitor. Harvey never replaced our department's manager, so we operated with little control. Unless you regard me as the supervisor, we didn't have someone continually telling us how to do things. Our department had a few issues, but overall it ran really nicely. Because we did not have our own manager, We frequently had to radio for a manager to come assist us with items that required a management card for clearance. Frito was always the one to answer these calls because the kitchen was closest to our department. Over time, the new team of managers came to regard Frito as the manager of our department as well. However, the hourly team still considered me their supervisor. This meant that whenever Frito attempted to make changes that would ultimately harm us, the team relied on me to mitigate those disasters or negotiate with Frito to allow us to do our duties in the way we had previously demonstrated worked really effectively. Frito and I butted heads hundreds of times over the course of several months. He and I were continually debating about how crucial hours were for the employees in this department. He had it in his head that we should be living off of tips like waiters. But because most of our orders were carry-out, they came in through Grubhub, and Grubhub does not tip. We didn't have a lot of deliveries in a day, and the tips we earned were maybe $10 if we were lucky. However, splitting $10 four ways does not add up to much. It only demonstrated Frito's lack of understanding of the subject matter. We eventually met with Harvey, Frito, and all of the workers in this section. It was advertised as an opportunity to express our criticisms and concerns about the changes they planned to make without fear of punishment. So the workmen did just that. They discussed Frito's attempts to cut hours despite the fact that he is not our official manager. When it was said that they were looking for someone to be the manager, the team requested that I take over because I had already been supervising them and keeping things going smoothly for several months. I was also the one who management consulted when creating schedules because I knew which days some employees could and couldn't work due to school schedules or family responsibilities. I could see the moment it was recommended that Harvey and Frito decide right away that I needed to be removed. Although they didn't say it, I could tell by the look they exchanged that my days at this place were limited, and my employment was going to be eliminated one way or another. They made several promises to us about not cutting hours. They informed us that they would no longer send all but one worker home early, leaving only one person to clean everything and close up by themselves. As this was not a tiny department, and it was simply too much for one person to accomplish alone while still fulfilling health and safety regulations. They guaranteed that we would work the hours we were planned for. We weren't trying to be unreasonable, so we explained that we generally have 3 or 4 people working in our department. They could cut 2 of them early, but we always wanted at least 2 persons present to ensure good closure. They promised to always have at least 2 closers. However, approximately a week later, they resumed sending all but one individual home early each night. They attempted it one night while I was supposed to be the closer, and we had just returned from a huge catering event with an astounding amount of cleanup for one person. When Frito came in and attempted to send everyone but me home, I stood up and reminded him that he was continually breaching the commitment he made to us during the meeting. He stared me in the eye and ordered me to stop whining about it, and that if I continued to try to talk to him about breaking his commitments, he could easily find someone to work my shifts. I instantly recognized this was an assassination attempt on my job. He wanted me to push it harder, so I backed off and began cleaning. I ended up needing to remain very late, which resulted in overtime pay. Anyway, I received a write-up for it because we can't work overtime without a manager's permission. When I refused to sign the write-up, citing that I had tried to explain to Frito that I wouldn't be able to clean up all that stuff on my own before my schedule ended, I was allowed to leave without signing it, but only because the HR representative present at the time wasn't one of Harvey's cronies. Jump ahead to the day I was fired. It is vital to emphasize here that I always arrive at work an hour early. We lived in Chicago, so food was pricey. But at work, we were permitted to eat as much free soup and bread as we wanted. So I would arrive at work an hour early every day to have soup and bread for lunch before my shift. But today, I went into the kitchen to fetch myself some soup. One of the line cooks informed me that he had a dish that had been canceled after he had cooked it, and Frito had instructed him to give it to someone. He informed me that Frito had already compensated for it and that it was free to anyone who wanted it. It just happened to be my favorite appetizer. So I gladly accepted the free food, not long after I arrived at my booth. Harvey and Frito came me and inquired if I had purchased a ticket for that dish. I informed them that the line chef had given it to me and that it was a canceled order that Frito had previously compensated. Frito looked stunned and stated he had no idea what I was talking about. So Harvey informed me, "I believe you understand that's theft. Go ahead and eat your dinner. Then gather my belongings and leave. That is the last supper you will have here." I tried to explain that I had received this food from the line cook, but they refused to listen. But by the time I returned to the kitchen with them to speak with the line cook, he had already left for the day. I had no choice but to grab my belongings, say farewell, and return home. On my way out, I told the colleagues in my department exactly what had transpired that afternoon. They were astonished, outraged, and mostly sorry to see me leave. I decided that on my way out, I'd stop by accounting and pick up any tips that had been left for me that week, just to make sure I didn't miss out on the money. Before coming home, I got a gut sense to just set my phone to record and tuck it into my pocket with the camera rolling. Although the camera was completely black because it was in my pocket, I was able to acquire a somewhat garbled recording of Harvey and Frito's voices through the door discussing how everything had gone as planned and how they had been trying to get rid of me since the meeting with my department. I knocked on the door, and they quiet before opening it. They inquired as to what I was still doing there, and I requested tips. They collected what was in the safe for me and handed it over, despite my mounting indignation at what I had just heard. I decided not to burn this bridge just now because I might be able to nuke it later. I shook hands with both bosses and thanked them for the opportunity to work there before leaving. I made sure to take my phone out of my pocket and record the front of the restaurant with its name and emblem. Working in a restaurant, you learn to always conceal your buttocks. It's true for most jobs, but something told me I'd need it all later. If I was accused of theft, I wanted to be able to prove it was false in case it came up in future job interviews, which is precisely what happened and where everything went wrong. On the train trip home, I wrote some messages and posted on local Facebook groups that I had just been fired and was seeking for a job as soon as possible. By the time I got off my stop, I had already scheduled an interview for later that day. I was given a position around 5 minutes into the interview, but after going over the facts, it didn't sound right for me, so I declined. I interviewed at a couple different locations before finding one that was a suitable fit for me. With a significant pay boost over my previous position and no customer interaction. It was an auditing position for a logistics firm. However, during the interview with the manager for this position, he indicated that he had previously called my old employer and spoken with the general manager, Harvey. Harvey informed him that I had even been fired for theft. Fortunately for me, the manager I was meeting with wanted me to tell him more about it, and he agreed to let me bring out my phone and find the tape. I inquired if the voice in the video matched the one he spoke with on the phone. Yes, it was. That was enough to convince him that I hadn't manufactured a phony video. He listened to the two managers in the video admit that they had set me up and stayed to the end. When I displayed the front of the restaurant, complete with logo and name, Dean, the manager who interviewed me, hired me instantly and requested that I send him the recording. I did. I assumed that was the end of it, after roughly 7 months of settling into this work. HR sent out a welcome email to all of our new team members, which included information about the newest hiring as well as photos of them. They distributed these every time they employed a new group of staff. One of them, Thomas, was a former co-worker who had worked with me at the restaurant. We had worked at the host stand together, so I was pleased to see someone I knew and liked joining the team. I went to his desk and said hello, asking why he had left the restaurant. He had not departed willingly. He had been laid off because the company was being investigated. It had began as a minor issue. The corporate body that owned the restaurant chain received an email including an attached video, my video, which was captured from inside my pocket. This was sufficient reason for corporate to send someone to investigate internally. Thomas was astonished that I hadn't heard anything about it, given the repeated attempts to contact me. As soon as he said that, I signed into the old email address I had to use when applying for the job at the restaurant. I received at least 24 emails inviting me to come in and discuss my employment and termination. I never responded. I just didn't care anymore. I had also changed my phone number since then, so they couldn't reach me. Thomas went on to say that before corporate sent someone, Harvey and Fredo had spoken with my department and attempted to offer them all a minor pay boost in order to weave a story about how I was ineffective at my work and failed to fulfill my responsibilities. The day the corporate auditor arrived, there was a modest exodus from my old department. They quit on the spot in front of the lady from corporate. Let's call her Audrey. And made sure to rat on Harvey and Fredo before leaving. Strike one for both of them. Strike two occurred a few days after Audrey showed Harvey and Fredo the recording that had started all of this. They fiercely denied it. But Harvey's voice was unmistakable. It is unique. Not only that, but the video captured their voice and mine as we shook hands and parted ways. Something they had already bragging about to Audrey, believing that it made them appear better that we were able to part on good terms. This was not the genuine strike two. That happened when it was evident that they needed to be separated. So Audrey assigned Fredo to work at another restaurant owned by our parent firm, while temporarily demoting Harvey to manager. This ripped them apart. They were once an inseparable evil team, but the pressure of the inquiry must have pushed them to the edge. They got into a fight on Facebook in a public post on the corporate page. The post has now been deleted, but Thomas justified it as follows. Fredo was featured in a Facebook post on the restaurant's page, and Harvey made a passive-aggressive remark about how Fredo shouldn't even be in the photo because he had moved to another restaurant due to misconduct. Fredo saw this message and responded something like, "Well, at least people Google my name." "I don't come across as the person who punched his wife," Harvey responded, which was pretty funny coming from a guy who had cheated on his wife with Janet's sister. Janet is not her real name, but she was the female they appointed to formally monitor my previous flat after firing me. The unofficial supervisor, Fredo, responded by saying, "Like you haven't tried with half the waitresses." They all contain stories about you attempting to complete them. Audrey, the auditor, saw the post before it was deleted. This was technically strike two. Strike three occurred the next day, when Audrey began interrogating the female waitstaff and bartenders to see if any of them could confirm that Harvey had attempted to make a move on them. Each of them was interviewed separately. Several of them shared similar stories. Every female who said Harvey made a move on them stated he offered to be their, quote, sugar daddy, provided they sent nakey-wakies or stayed after closing to play about with him. Harvey was dismissed. But that was not the worst of it. Audrey, the auditor, was no ordinary corporate woman. She was the previous regional manager for this area, and she had personally hired Harvey's wife as general manager of another restaurant in the city. So she called the restaurant where Harvey's wife worked and told her all she had heard from the female waitstaff. We then heard that they divorced because he tried to cheat on her after she had already given him a second chance to change after he physically abused her. I'm not sure what motivated her to give him a second chance after something like that, but she definitely did not give him a third chance. Audrey questioned the line cook who had provided me with complimentary food after Harvey was fired. I'm not sure how that came up, but at some point he admitted to being an illegal immigrant. She had his file in her hand, which contained an Illinois ID and a social security number. So this perplexed her as she prodded him for more information. It turned out that Fredo had some connections and ran his own small black market, where he created false social security cards and IDs for the illegal immigrants he was hiring at a low wage. This has been going on for at least 4 years. Needless to say, this was a felony, with the probable PR nightmare she was likely facing. She felt she had no choice except to notify authorities. The local police department enlisted the assistance of the FBI because some of the evidence took them beyond the authority of the local police. Fredo was caught and soon revealed the names of others working to sell social security cards and IDs. I am not sure if he handed up all of them, but he did name about 14 people. and at least half of those 14 had been deported by the time Thomas was released. One of them was the line cook who served me the food the day I was fired. Thomas went on to say that it all started with my firing. But I never transmitted the recording to corporate. I just sent it to Dean after he hired me. I asked him about it, and he said he had forwarded it to his wife, who is a lawyer. He wanted to investigate whether I had a case to sue my former employer, because what they did was wrong. But he also remembered that when we first discussed it, I said, I'm not the type of person who enjoys profiting on the mistakes of two jerks. But I also mentioned that it would be really wonderful to see them lose their jobs. So his wife had sent it to the legal staff at my old restaurant's corporate headquarters. My supervisor presented it to his wife, who forwarded it to the actual bosses of my previous employment. They were both just trying to get two scumbags fired for what they did to me, but ended up pulling a thread so long that it didn't end until there were harassment accusations. Revelations about managers cheating on their wives with girls related to people that they placed in positions of authority. A divorce. Mass layoffs. Pending investigations. A staff overhaul. An FBI investigation into what can be considered black market dealings of falsified government-issued documents. This has got to be the most inadvertently nuclear revenge narrative we've seen on the channel thus far. He didn't even go after them in a way that would get them into trouble. All he was trying to do was protect himself by gathering some evidence so that he might still get a job. This entire situation may have gone differently for the two employers if they had not lied when they received the call about the OP and claimed that he stole the food. Although he does not explicitly state it, it appears that the line cook who served him the food was involved. They do indicate that they had a strategy and that it proceeded as planned. So we can infer that the line cook was part of that plan. And if that's the case, they've already achieved their goal of having a reason to fire him. This story is a powerful reminder that doing the right thing, no matter how quietly, can sometimes shake the very foundations of injustice. For many of us who've lived long lives, we've seen what happens when power is abused, when good people are punished for speaking up, and when those in charge forget their responsibility to lead with integrity. What makes this story so extraordinary is that the young man didn't retaliate with anger or vengeance. He simply told the truth, preserved his dignity, and let the facts speak for themselves. And what unfolded was not just justice for him, but a sweeping reckoning for a workplace built on lies, corruption, and cruelty. It's a story about standing your ground, even when the odds seem stacked against you. It's a quiet triumph for every worker who was ever dismissed, disrespected, or overlooked, and a powerful lesson in the long reach of truth. Have you ever witnessed someone rise above a toxic situation with quiet strength? Or have you faced a moment when your integrity was tested? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in doing the right thing no matter what.